Hello and welcome to Continuing Clockwise, a channel about games, gamers, and gaming. I'm Chad. For today's video, we're going to talk about Rex, the final days of an empire. And I'm going to tell you who should buy it and who should avoid it. Fantasy Flight's Rex was released in 2012 with some design work by Cory Kanicha. He's done a lot of great work from that company. It's essentially a re-implementation of the Dune board game from the 1970s. It has a suggested retail price of about $60, but you can probably find it for $50 or so on Amazon. The Dune board game was based on the science fiction classic Dune by Frank Herbert. For licensing reasons, it's been out of print for decades and has been really hard to find as a result. But it has a huge fan following. So first off, if you've been looking for Dune and you've been trying to find it and you really want to play it but have failed, you should buy this game. If you've read Dune and really want to play a game that shares the political intrigue and factional machinations of that book, you should buy this game. Now, for those of you still wondering if you should buy this game or not, we'll start on the outside and work our way in as we go. Rex comes in a big, heavy box filled with wonderful toys, as we've learned to expect from Fantasy Flight. So, right out of the gate, if you're the kind of person who buys everything Fantasy Flight puts out, you should buy this game. Rex is also a solid Ameritrash game. It is very heavy on theme and fidgety bits. As an example, this fleet that comes with it is really cool. And the back of the rulebook comes with a short story that really immerses you. It's like, look, see this, it's like 6 pages. And each culture has its own narration on the back of the card that really gives you a sense for what they're about, what their goals are, and does a lot to immerse you into the game story. All right, so let's take a look here. All these pieces, we'll talk about these later. These are the battle dials. Cool. A lot of fidgety bits. Another fidgety bit. A lot of fidgety bits. And I should say that I think it came with a couple bags, but mostly I have added these myself. Fidgety bits, some cards. It's really cool. All right, so that gives you a sense. Now let's take a look at the board. This is a board game after all. So, as you would expect, it's big, heavy cardboard, really strong, really nice. I do have some quibbles about some of these components, however. Now, while the art direction generally is really wonderful, each faction has its own look, has its own artwork. The pieces are really strong, really well put together. The board itself is actually a little muddy and unattractive. And what's worse, you can actually lose track of the pieces during play. There's not a lot of contrast between the board's colors and the pieces' colors. There are a few elements that I fear wouldn't last necessarily after repeated play. So back to this fleet, let me show you. So while the fleet itself is really super cool, these little posts, these little plastic posts that the fleet is standing on are not that thick, and the little holes under the ships are also not really strong. To fit the fleet back in the box, you have to disassemble it between play every time. So that's a concern that I have. So I solved it by simply storing the fleet up with my D&D minis and my X-Wing miniature ships. The biggest concern I have about the components is with these battle dials. So these it's a really cool part of the game. With each battle, there are 2 of these, so 2 players are in battle at a time. And with each battle, you have to put one of your little leader tokens into one of these little slots. And so these little slots, it's all cardboard. It's a cardboard piece. And these little edges, I don't know if it'll really show up, but these little edges are just really, see, you can just pulling it out. You have to really be really ginger about these edges and how these edges kind of go together. Ultimately, I think it's these corners that will wear out after repeated gameplay. Personally, I find both of those flaws forgivable, but if you're really picky about your components and about them wearing out, frankly, you probably shouldn't buy this game. Another thing about Rex is that it has a pretty burly playtime. The box says that it's 2 to 3 hours, and I have not found that to be true. We did have one game that went 2 hours, but it's more likely a 2 to 4 hour playtime. And that can creep up even further with inexperienced players, or if you just have some players that are a little indecisive. If you love your Ameritrash games with a lot of flavor and long playing times, you should definitely buy this game. If you have no interest in that, or are simply not in a phase of life where a game, playing the same game for 4 hours or even more, is feasible, you probably shouldn't buy this game. The game itself is moderately complex. Each player chooses a different race, like I showed you before. And here's the really amazing thing about Rex. Each race has its own significantly different way of showing up in the game. So first, there's a layer of the fundamental rules. So that's how the turns work, how the rounds work, how combat works, how the cards work. And some of those things are pretty fidgety, but really pretty fun. And then on top of that, each player has a unique set of powers and goals of their own. This makes the game really shine after repeated play. In fact, I don't think you can really appreciate it the first time through. The first time through is fun, but there's just parts of the system that you have to see operate before you can understand them and really get into it. Considering the 2 to 4 hour playing time, that can be a real barrier to sinking your teeth into this game. Related to all this, diplomacy and political intrigue is another big part of Rex. In fact, there are specific rules for creating alliances that give really concrete advantages to the other factions in that alliance. For example, if you are one of the universities of Jolnar, and you create an alliance with another player, there's a card that you give them, and that card says exactly what their advantage is. If you don't want to play a game where a certain amount of negotiation and alliance building is pretty required, you shouldn't buy Rex. If that sounds fun to you, I have to say it is exceptionally well implemented here, and you should buy this game. There's another set of optional rules. There's another small deck of cards which gives each player another set of winning criteria. So players who really enjoy betrayal mechanics and secret information can play with that additional optional rule set. And I have to confess, my group hasn't gotten there yet. We're still just trying to work our way through the standard rules without adding the option. But if you do use them, they can create these situations where a faction can seem to win the game and then have another player or a player from that faction announce that their winning criteria has been met, thus making them the solitary sole winner of the game. And then even on top of that, the not Bene Gesserit, that's what they were called in Dune, the Zeshah is what they are, the turtle people, have a way that they can actually win the game if they predict who and when will win the game. So if after all that screwing around, they wind up having predicted who will win, they wind up the sole winners of the game. So if that sounds fun to you, and frankly it does sound really fun to me, you should buy this game. If it doesn't, and I understand that this kind of betrayal stuff is not for everybody, you might not want to buy this game. Having said that, that particular kind of back and forth most of that is optional. Last and not least, the rulebook uses male pronouns throughout. And I know Fantasy Flight Games has done that for quite a while. I don't know if they're still doing it. I actually reached out to them a few different ways for comment, but I'm just some guy, so I haven't heard back yet. And if you don't want to tolerate the use of exclusively male pronouns in your rulebook, you shouldn't buy this game. To summarize, you should buy this game if you really want to play the old Dune board game but can't find it. If you love Fantasy Flight board games, if you love games with a lot of science fiction flavor, fidgety bits, and with long playing times, and if the idea of asymmetrical gameplay thrills you. All of those are reasons why you should buy this game. You probably shouldn't buy this game if you don't like science fiction or if you don't like the Twilight Imperium universe. If you expect perfection from your art direction and from your components, if 2 to 4 hours of a playing time is simply too long for you for whatever reason, or if you don't like games with moderate complexity. Rex, Final Days of an Empire, is not a game for everybody, but if it is your thing, it is really good and you should buy this game. It's really well done, and honestly, it's priced quite fairly. If you have any questions about what I talked about today, if you should buy this game, let me know in the comments. Also, if you've played this game, if you're familiar with it and disagree or do agree or want to have a conversation, I would love that. Also, please do that in the comments or reach out in however way you'd like. Also, let me know if you have any ideas or suggestions for future topics. If you enjoyed this video, please consider clicking the like button and subscribing to the channel. And until next week, happy gaming.